King Leopold II of Belgium is barely remembered today. Most people couldn't name a single Belgian king. But Leopold should be remembered, not honored, remembered, because between 1885 and 1900, this one man personally owned an African territory 76 times, the size of Belgium, and used it as his private torture and extraction operation. The Congo Free State wasn't a colony in the traditional sense. It was Leopold's personal property, his private business, and his business model was simple. Force Congolese people to harvest rubber and ivory under threat of mutilation and death. Extract as much wealth as possible. Lie to the world about what was happening. The death toll is estimated between 10 and 15 million people, maybe more. Nobody kept accurate records because Leopold didn't want accurate records. He wanted profit, and he got it. Became one of the wealthiest men in Europe by turning Central Africa into a death camp disguised as a humanitarian mission. If you're interested in the monsters history tried to forget, subscribe to Ear Disturbed Historian. We're telling the stories about people who committed atrocities and died. Comfortable, Leopold became King of Belgium in 1865. Belgium was a small, relatively new country. Created in 1830, wealthy from industrialization, but lacking the colonies other European powers had. Britain had India, France had Algeria, the Netherlands had Indonesia, Belgium had nothing. And Leopold desperately wanted an empire, not for Belgium, for himself. He was obsessed with joining the colonial club, with having territory he could exploit, with building monuments and projects that would make him legendary. But Belgium's parliament wasn't interested in expensive colonial adventures. So Leopold decided to acquire a colony privately, as a personal possession, and he found the perfect target, the Congo basin in Central Africa. The Congo was enormous, dense rainforest, rich in resources, rubber trees, ivory, minerals, and it was largely unmapped by Europeans. Various African kingdoms and communities lived there, but European powers hadn't yet carved it up. Leopold saw opportunity. He just needed to convince the world that his intentions were noble, that he wanted to bring civilization and Christianity to Central Africa, that he was a humanitarian. So he created the International African Association in 1876, presented it as a scientific and philanthropic organization, claimed its purpose was exploring Africa, ending the Arab slave trade, and improving the lives of Africans. It was all lies, but it was very effective lies. Leopold hired Henry Morton Stanley, the famous explorer, to help him claim the Congo. Stanley traveled the region making treaties with local chiefs. These treaties were fraudulent. The chiefs didn't understand what they were signing. Many couldn't read. The documents were in languages they didn't speak. They thought they were agreeing to friendship or trade. They were actually signing over sovereignty, giving Leopold control of their land and people. Stanley collected hundreds of these fake treaties, and Leopold used them to argue that he'd legitimately acquired the territory. In 1885, European powers met at the Berlin Conference to divide Africa among themselves. They recognized Leopold's claim to the Congo, not as a Belgian colony, as Leopold's personal property, the Congo Free State. It was an unprecedented arrangement, an entire country, over 2 million square kilometers, owned by one man. Leopold promised the conference attendees that he would improve the lives of Congolese people, would end slavery, would allow free trade, would bring progress. Every promise was a lie, but the European powers didn't care. They were dividing Africa like a cake. What happened after didn't matter as long as everyone got their piece. Leopold never visited the Congo, not once. He ruled it from Belgium through a military force called the Force Publique. These were African soldiers commanded by white European officers. They were Leopold's enforcers, his violence workers, and their job was simple: forced Congolese people to meet rubber quotas. The rubber boom had made rubber extraordinarily valuable. It was needed for bicycle and automobile tires, for industrial machinery. Demand was exploding, and the Congo had wild rubber vines everywhere. Leopold saw this as his fortune. All he needed was free labor to harvest it, and he had millions of people he could force to work. The system was brutal beyond description. Villages were given rubber quotas. Impossible quotas. Everyone had to harvest. Rubber, men, women, children. If you didn't meet your quota, the force publique punished your village. They'd burn homes, take hostages, kill people. But the signature punishment was amputation. The force publique would cut off hands. If a village didn't produce enough rubber, soldiers would chop off hands as punishment and motivation. Not just one hand, many hands, from adults and children. There are photographs. Congolese people staring at cameras holding up stumps where their hands used to be. The soldiers were required to account for the bullets they used. Every bullet fired had to be justified. So when soldiers shot someone, they'd cut off a hand to prove the bullet had been used to kill rather than wasted. This created a perverse incentive. Soldiers would cut off hands of living people to cover for bullets. Used hunting or in target practice, the severed hands became a currency. Proof of work. Baskets of smoked hands were delivered to white officers as evidence that quotas were being enforced. The horror of this is difficult to process. An entire system built around mutilating people to prove you were doing your job. But mutilation wasn't the only violence. Starvation was systematic. Men were forced to spend all their time harvesting rubber. They couldn't farm, couldn't hunt, couldn't feed their families. Women and children were taken hostage to ensure men worked. Held in camps, given minimal food, many died. Disease spread rapidly in these camps, and if men didn't produce enough rubber, their families were killed. Not threatened, killed. This wasn't discipline. It was genocide through forced labor and starvation. The death toll is staggering. Population estimates suggest the Congo had around 20 million people in 1885. By 1908, the population had dropped to perhaps 10 million. 10 million people, dead from forced labor, starvation, disease, murder, mutilation, that led to infection and death. The exact number is uncertain because Leopold's administration deliberately didn't keep accurate records of the African population. They counted rubber, they counted ivory, they didn't count Congolese lives. Leopold extracted enormous wealth. The exact amount is unclear because he kept his Congo finances secret. But estimates suggest he made the equivalent of over $1 billion in today's money. He used this wealth to build monuments in Belgium, the Royal Museum for Central Africa, the Arcade du Cinquantenaire, lavish building projects designed to glorify himself and Belgium. He bought properties, funded mistresses, lived in extreme luxury, all of it paid for with blood. And the entire time he maintained his humanitarian facade. He gave interviews praising his civilizing mission, talked about bringing progress to Africa, published propaganda about schools and hospitals in the Congo. There were some schools and hospitals, tiny efforts compared to the massive extraction operation. But Leopold knew how to manage his image. He controlled information coming out of the Congo, restricted access, expelled journalists who wrote critically, and for years it worked. Europe saw him as a philanthropic king, bringing civilization to savages. But eventually the truth leaked out. Missionaries started reporting what they saw. Edmund Morel, a British shipping clerk, noticed something strange about cargo going to and from the Congo. Ships went to the Congo carrying only guns, chains, and ammunition. They returned loaded with rubber and ivory. If Leopold was engaged in legitimate trade, where were the trade goods going to Africa? What were Congolese people being paid with? Morel realized the answer. They weren't being paid. This was slavery, forced labor, and he started publicizing it. Roger Casement, a British consul, investigated conditions in the Congo. His report, published in 1904, was devastating. He documented the atrocities, the mutilations, the hostage-taking, the starvation, the mass death. Casement interviewed survivors, collected testimony, took photographs. His report caused an international scandal. Suddenly, Leopold's humanitarian image was shattered. The world saw the Congo Free State for what it was, a slave labor death camp operating under the pretense of civilization. The Congo Reform Association formed to pressure Leopold. Mark Twain wrote a satirical pamphlet mocking Leopold's defenses. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a book condemning the atrocities. International pressure mounted. Leopold tried to discredit the reports, called them exaggerations, blamed rogue officers, claimed he'd been deceived by subordinates, but the evidence was overwhelming. Photographs of mutilated children, testimony from missionaries and officials, documents showing the quota systems. Leopold couldn't hide it anymore. In 1908, international pressure forced Leopold to hand over the Congo, not to independence, to Belgium. The Belgian government took control and renamed it the Belgian Congo. This ended Leopold's personal ownership, but didn't end exploitation. The Belgian government continued extracting resources and abusing Congolese people, just less overtly. But for Leopold it was over. His private colony was gone, and importantly, he was never punished. Leopold died in 1909. He was 74. He died in his palace, comfortable, wealthy, still king of Belgium. He'd killed 10 million people and faced no legal consequences. No trial, no prison, no execution. He just handed over the Congo and lived out his final year as a respected monarch. His funeral was elaborate. Thousands attended. He was buried with honors. And Belgium didn't seriously reckon with his crimes for over a century. Leopold left a complicated legacy in Belgium. He'd built beautiful buildings, funded infrastructure, helped make Brussels a grand European capital. Many Belgians admired him for that. The fact that it was all built with Congolese blood was acknowledged, quietly if at all. Statues of Leopold were erected, streets named after him. For decades, Belgian children were taught that Leopold had civilized the Congo, that he'd been a great king. The atrocities were minimized or ignored entirely. The Congo's trauma didn't end with Leopold. Belgian colonial rule continued the exploitation until 1960. When the Congo finally gained independence, it was immediately plunged into crisis. Belgium had done almost nothing to prepare the country for self-governance, had educated almost no Congolese people in administration or leadership. The first Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, was assassinated within months with Belgian and American involvement. The country descended into decades of dictatorship under Mobutu Sese Seko, backed by Western powers who wanted the Congo's resources and didn't care about its people. Modern Democratic Republic of Congo remains one of the poorest, most unstable countries on Earth. Despite having enormous mineral wealth, cobalt, coltan, copper, gold, diamonds, resources, essential for modern technology. Your smartphone probably contains minerals from the Congo, but that wealth doesn't benefit most Congolese people. It's extracted by multinational corporations. Profits go elsewhere. The population suffers from poverty, disease, and ongoing conflict. This is Leopold's legacy. Not just the 10 million he killed, but the century of exploitation and instability that followed. Belgium has begun slowly to reckon with Leopold. In 2020, during global protests over racism and colonialism, statues of Leopold were vandalized and removed. The Belgian government expressed regret. King Philippe wrote a letter acknowledging Congo's suffering under Belgian rule. But these are recent developments. For over 100 years, Belgium celebrated Leopold, and many Belgians still don't know the full extent of what he did. The schools taught sanitized versions. The museums presented colonialism as benevolent. Only recently has the truth become part of mainstream Belgian consciousness. Leopold's story reveals something disturbing about how atrocities are remembered. Hitler killed millions and is universally condemned. Everyone knows his name. His crimes are taught in schools worldwide. Stalin killed millions and is widely recognized as a monster. But Leopold killed 10 million and remained a respected figure in Belgium for a century. Why? Partly because his victims were African. Black lives mattered less to European historical memory. Partly because he successfully branded his atrocities as civilization. And partly because he died unpunished and wealthy, allowing his propaganda to outlive him. The Congo Free State wasn't an aberration. It was colonialism with the mask removed. Other European powers did similar things. Britain in India, France in Algeria, Spain in Latin America, Portugal in Angola, the Dutch in Indonesia. They all extracted wealth through violence and forced labor. They all killed enormous numbers of people. Leopold was just more blatant, less interested in maintaining the civilizing mission pretense, more focused on pure profit extraction. But the fundamental logic was the same. European powers could take whatever they wanted from non-European people and dress it up as progress. Leopold personally profited from genocide. That's not exaggeration. That's documented fact. He owned the Congo. The rubber and ivory extracted through forced labor were his property. The money went to him personally. He spent it on buildings and mistresses and monuments to himself. He built a legacy in Belgium using blood money, and for over 100 years it worked. He was remembered as a great king. The Congolese people he'd killed and mutilated were forgotten. This is why history matters, why we can't sanitize it, why we have to tell the ugly truth. Because Leopold's story isn't ancient history. People alive today have grandparents who lived under Belgian colonial rule in Congo. The instability and poverty in modern DRC are direct results of colonial extraction. The wealth in Brussels, some of it, came from Congolese suffering. These aren't abstract connections. These are material realities. Leopold was a monster, not a complicated figure, not a man of his time. A monster who built a system specifically designed to extract maximum wealth through maximum violence while lying to the world about his intentions. He succeeded completely, made a fortune, built a legacy, died comfortable, and that's perhaps the most disturbing part, that someone could kill 10 million people and die peacefully. That atrocity at that scale could be committed by a king who never faced justice. The photographs of mutilated Congolese people still exist. Children with amputated hands staring at cameras, adults holding up stumps, villages destroyed. These images are documentation, proof that it happened. That Leopold's humanitarian mission was a lie. That the Congo Free State was a hell on earth, created deliberately by one man's greed. Those photographs should be as famous as Holocaust images, should be taught in every school, should be impossible to ignore, but they're not. Most people have never seen them. Most people don't know Leopold's name. That needs to change. Not to shame Belgium, but to remember the victims. To acknowledge that colonial atrocities weren't distant abstract events. They were systematic violence against millions of real people with names and families and lives that were destroyed for profit. Leopold's Congo was genocide, mass murder, slavery. All of it dressed up as civilization and blessed by European powers who didn't care what happened to Africans as long as the resources kept flowing. Leopold II died in 1909, but his legacy lives on. In the poverty of the DRC, in the wealth of Belgium, in the monuments he built with blood money, in the long silence about his crimes, in the fact that he's barely known outside. Belgium, while his victims are forgotten entirely. That's the final atrocity, that he got away with it. Not just legally, but historically. His name faded while his buildings stood. His crimes were minimized while his achievements were celebrated. And millions of dead Congolese people became a footnote. This is why we tell these stories at Disturbed Historian. Because history isn't just kings and battles and dates. It's people. Millions of people who suffered and died. And they deserve to be remembered. Not as statistics, not as unfortunate victims of progress, but as human beings who were murdered for profit by a man who faced no consequences, who built palaces with their bones and died honored. King Leopold said, remember the name, not to honor it, to condemn it, to ensure that the 10 to 15 million people he killed aren't forgotten, to acknowledge that colonialism wasn't civilizing. It was barbarism with better public relations, and to recognize that the wealth and poverty we see today aren't natural. They're the results of choices, of systems, of men like Leopold who chose profit over human life and got away with it. The Congo remembers, even if Europe tried to forget. The trauma passed through generations. The poverty created by extraction persists. The instability caused by colonial borders and exploitation continues. Leopold's crime didn't end in 1908. It echoes still, in every conflict over Congolese resources, in every child who dies from preventable disease in one of the world's richest countries, in the ongoing reality that the Congo's wealth benefits everyone except the Congolese. That's Leopold's legacy. Not the buildings in Brussels, not the monuments, the mass graves, the amputated hands, the destroyed villages, the generations of trauma, the ongoing exploitation. That's what he built. That's what he should be remembered for. Not as a king, as a mass murderer who died unpunished and comfortable, who history almost let disappear, but won't. Not anymore. Not while the evidence exists. Not while the descendants of his victims are still suffering the consequences. King Leopold II, the butcher of Congo, the man who killed 10 million people for rubber and called it civilization. Remember him. Remember what he did. Remember that he got away with it. And remember the millions who died so he could build monuments to himself. They deserve that much. They deserve to be more than a disturbing footnote in the biography of a king most people have never heard of. They deserve to be remembered, and Leopold deserves to be condemned forever, without qualification, without excuse, as the monster he was